They stole my disabled brother's wheelchair, not out of desperation or confusion, but because they claimed that people in wheelchairs made the neighborhood look cheap. But they didn't know who they were messing with. The man they humiliated wasn't just some helpless guy in a chair, he was a high-ranking federal official with deep connections to the FBI. And thanks to their arrogance, their petty HOA dictatorship was about to become the center of a full-scale criminal investigation. It all started with a violation notice, bright red, taped to my brother's front door, declaring a $1,000 fine for unauthorized medical equipment in public view. At first, we thought it had to be a mistake. But when we called the HOA, the truth was worse. The president, Linda Holloway, smugly told us that mobility devices create an unsightly atmosphere and lower property values. They were enforcing new, aesthetic guidelines, she said, as if that excused discrimination. The next morning, my brother's wheelchair was gone, stolen right off his porch. Security footage showed two men in HOA-branded shirts taking it in the dead of night and loading it into a white maintenance truck. No warning. No explanation. Just theft. My brother, Mark, was furious. He had survived a devastating car crash, rebuilt his life, and now this? But Linda and her crew had no idea who Mark really was, a federal intelligence consultant with authority to audit organizations, expose fraud, and make lives very, very difficult. He opened his laptop with a grim smile. Let's see what else they're hiding. Within the hour, we were combing through tax records and expense reports. The usual nonsense popped up, overpriced landscaping, vague improvement projects, but then we saw it, cash withdrawals from a special maintenance fund. Thousands of dollars, vanishing without receipts or documentation. This isn't just petty, Mark muttered. This is criminal. That night, we went to the HOA meeting. Linda stood at the podium, spewing nonsense about preserving community standards. When the floor opened for comments, I stood and asked about the theft. Her response? That they had the right to remove non-compliant objects. She said it like stealing a man's medical device was just routine business. But then I pulled out financial records showing $200,000 in unaccounted funds. Her smile dropped. The room erupted. Mark rolled forward and spoke calmly, his tone deadly serious. Financial misconduct in a registered HOA is subject to federal investigation. And I think I'll be making a few calls in the morning. Panic spread across the board members' faces. Greg, one of the directors, turned to Linda. You said everything was fine, he hissed. Shut up, Greg, she snapped, but it was too late. The homeowners were turning. Demanding answers. Asking questions Linda couldn't answer. You don't know who you're messing with, she whispered. Mark grinned. Neither do you. We walked out as the meeting fell into chaos. That night, Mark sent a report to a federal fraud investigator. The next morning, a black unmarked car was parked outside Linda's house. And that was just the beginning. By sunrise, Mark was deep into coordination mode, firing off emails, compiling statements, calling in every favor he'd ever earned. This wasn't revenge. It was justice. And by the end of the day, the first domino fell, a state notice of financial review landed in the HOA's inbox. From that moment on, the board's accounts were frozen. We watched Linda speed away from her driveway, probably to the HOA office to clean up the mess. But it was already too late. Meanwhile, I went door to door, collecting stories from neighbors, bogus fees, unexplained dues, foreclosure threats. Every homeowner had a story. By noon, we had a folder full of complaints. And when Mark picked up the phone again, his voice was calm but firm. Special Agent David? I think we've got something you'll want to see. Mark made the call with precision. His voice was cool, composed. I have a case you might be interested in, multi-state HOA fraud, financial manipulation, and organized criminal activity disguised as community governance. The line was silent for a long moment. Then the reply came, curt and clear. "I'll be there in 2 hours." At 2:30 p.m., 3 unmarked black SUVs rolled into the neighborhood and parked outside the HOA office. I stood on the sidewalk, watching as 3 men in dark suits stepped out, badges flashing. They didn't stop to make small talk. They walked right past the stunned receptionist and straight into Linda Holloway's office. 20 minutes later, she was led out in handcuffs. The neighborhood was still. Homeowners stood on their porches in disbelief, watching as the woman who had ruled over them for years was loaded into the back of a government vehicle. She shouted for a lawyer, claimed she'd done nothing wrong, but the agents weren't interested in her excuses. Mark had handed them a bulletproof case, and Linda was just the first domino. "One down," I muttered. "The whole board to go," Mark replied, eyes still on his screen. And he wasn't wasting time. He forwarded the same evidence packet to every member of the board, accompanied by a single sentence: "Resign immediately, or expect federal agents at your door." The first to crack was Greg, the board member who looked most uneasy the night before. His resignation email hit the inbox at 4:12 p.m. By 6:30, 2 more members had quit. A few tried to hold out, still clinging to some twisted sense of power. They wouldn't last long. The final blow came at 7:45 p.m. when Mark's phone rang. He answered casually, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Oh really?" he said, tone amused. "That's fascinating. No, I'll be happy to assist." He hung up, then turned to me. His grin was sharp enough to cut glass. "Guess who's getting a full IRS audit?" I nearly spit out my drink. "Not kidding," he continued. "Turns out someone's been underreporting taxable income. And since HOA funds are technically non-profit revenue, any embezzlement counts as federal tax fraud." He cracked his knuckles. "Linda's going to be sharing a cell with her treasurer before the week is out." By morning, news vans were lined up outside. Word had spread like wildfire. A local reporter had picked up the story, and suddenly, our quiet suburban neighborhood was headline material. Cameras rolled as residents came forward, each with a horror story of fines, harassment, and threats. That evening, the headline blared across every screen: "HOA president arrested in multi-state fraud investigation." But the best moment came at 8 p.m., an emergency HOA meeting was called. Mark and I arrived early, taking seats near the front. The remaining board members were pale, hands trembling. Linda's chair sat empty, a grim symbol of what happens when power is abused. Greg stood, visibly shaken, and cleared his throat. Effective immediately, he announced, voice cracking, "The board of the Willow Creek HOA is hereby dissolved." The room exploded with cheers. Applause, laughter, even tears of relief. I felt it too, that wave of satisfaction that came when justice finally landed. Mark wheeled forward, his tone calm but commanding. "I suggest you begin the process of refunding every homeowner you've ever wrongfully fined." Greg nodded quickly. "Yes, of course. We'll work with authorities to return all misappropriated funds." "You'll do more than that," I said, stepping beside Mark. "You're going to return my brother's wheelchair." Silence swept the room. Greg swallowed hard. We'll make sure it's returned right away." And sure enough, the next morning, a brand new, top-of-the-line wheelchair sat on Mark's porch. No note of apology, just a single typed message attached. "Consider this an apology. We were wrong." Mark smirked down at the chair like a man who had just won a war. "I think," he said, rolling forward, "we just made history." The fallout hit the neighborhood like a hurricane. With Linda gone and the board dissolved, the entire structure collapsed faster than anyone expected. Homeowners who had once lived in fear realized they had power. Within a day, the neighborhood chat exploded, people demanding refunds, pushing for lawsuits, and even speaking out about how they'd been forced to sell their homes under financial duress. Mark tracked it all, his fingers flying across the keyboard. They're panicking, he said, watching real-time email deletions, records being wiped, too late. He forwarded every digital trail to the investigators. That's obstruction of justice, he added. They'll be lucky if they're not sharing a cell with Linda. Then it happened, a new message popped up in his inbox. No name. Just a subject line. You should stop now. My stomach tightened as I read it. The message was blunt. You've made your point. Walk away before things get worse. I looked at Mark. Is that a threat? He didn't flinch. Of course it is. He pulled out a burner phone and forwarded it to an encrypted contact. And in about 10 minutes, we'll know exactly who sent it. The reply came fast, IP address, location data, and a name. Mark tilted the screen toward me. Well, he muttered. Looks like Greg just made his final mistake. Turns out, Greg wasn't just a passive board member, he was the financial brains behind the laundering operation. His fingerprints were all over shell company transfers, fake invoices, and embezzled HOA funds. And now, he was trying to scare us off. We're paying Greg a visit, I said, jaw tight. We found him exactly where we expected, his lavish, newly renovated home. Everything about it screamed money. Money he stole. I rang the bell. Greg opened the door, pale and sweating. What do you want? He snapped. To talk, I replied calmly. Unless you'd rather hear it from the FBI. He tried to shut the door. Mark blocked it with his footrest. Bad move, he said coldly. Because right now, we're the only ones willing to let you make a deal. Greg hesitated, his eyes darting like a trapped animal. You have no idea what you're getting into, he whispered. This goes higher than just us. Doesn't matter, Mark replied, pulling up a screen. I have your entire digital footprint. Every fraudulent transfer. Every erased email. One click, and it's in the state attorney's hands. Greg cracked. What do you want? Your full cooperation. An hour later, Greg gave us everything, names, dates, connections. The scheme ran deeper than we imagined. Linda and the board had partnered with a shadowy group called the Vellers. Their goal? Force out undesirable homeowners, buy properties below market value, and flip them for massive profits with help from corrupt investors and city officials. It was never about rules, Greg said, defeated. It was about erasing people who didn't fit the neighborhood image. People like Mark, I said. Greg didn't even try to deny it. That night, Mark and I sent the full dossier to law enforcement, the IRS, and the press. The next morning, search warrants were executed. Police raided the HOA office, seized records, computers, everything. The neighborhood gathered, stunned, watching the empire fall. And then came the final bombshell. The county prosecutor announced charges, not just against Linda and Greg, but against 3 real estate investors, a property appraiser, and a city zoning official. A web of corruption, money laundering, and abuse, ripped out at the roots. And Mark? He watched it all from the porch, a quiet smile on his face, sipping coffee like the storm was just another morning breeze. The neighborhood didn't just change, it transformed. With the HOA officially dissolved and a court-appointed receiver stepping in to oversee restitution, the air felt lighter. Homeowners who had once shuffled past each other with downcast eyes now chatted freely on sidewalks, laughter echoing where silence once reigned. The untouchable elite of the HOA were either bankrupt, behind bars, or hiding. The reign of fear was over. Mark and I stood on his porch, watching a moving truck pull up to Greg's house. Guess he took the deal, I said, nodding at the packed boxes. Running before they slap him with something worse. Mark rolled forward in his wheelchair, smirking. Cowards always do. A few minutes later, Greg emerged, arms full, face aged by stress. He saw us, hesitated, then muttered, I should have never signed on with them. I crossed my arms. You're right. You shouldn't have. A few days later, Mark's new wheelchair arrived, fully customized, state-of-the-art, and paid for by the HOA's restitution fund. A small victory, maybe. But watching him roll down the sidewalk, not just as a man wronged, but as the one who took them down, felt monumental. For the first time in years, the neighborhood truly belonged to its people. Mark turned back, grinning. So, what's next? I laughed. Something tells me another corrupt HOA is about to have a really bad day. But what happened next was beyond anything we expected. News of the scandal had exploded, not just locally, but nationally. Other HOAs started coming under scrutiny. Homeowners from across the country reached out, sharing horror stories, rigged fines, illegal foreclosures, doctored books, threats. It was like we'd cracked a dam, and the flood was here. One night, Mark and I sat in his living room, watching a live news report of another HOA collapse, this one in Arizona. "They're all the same," he muttered, scrolling through his overflowing inbox. "Different faces. Same dirty playbook. Abuse the rules, steal the homes, bury the evidence." Among the emails were reporters looking for leads, lawyers asking for our files, and dozens, maybe hundreds, of desperate homeowners begging for help. "We did what we came to do," I said. "We exposed them. Shut them down. Got justice. So why does it feel like we're just getting started?" Mark smirked and turned his laptop around. On the screen was a growing database, a digital graveyard of corrupt HOAs, embezzlement cases, discrimination complaints, and rigged board elections. "This isn't just one neighborhood," he said. "It's a network. And we know exactly how to bring it down." I stared at the list, the names, the patterns. My gut tightened. "You want to do this again?" I asked. "Not just again," Mark said. "Everywhere. We've got the playbook now. We know where the cracks are. We're not just homeowners anymore. We're the ones they should be afraid of." It was thrilling, and terrifying. "How do we even start?" He tapped the screen. "We start with the biggest fraud we can find." And then, as if fate were listening, the call came. A lawyer from a major metro area had heard about us. "I have a client," he said, his voice tight. "An elderly woman. Lost her home to a foreclosure scam. The HOA used fake violations to rack up debt, then evicted her and sold the house. She's homeless now. Courts won't touch it." My stomach dropped. This wasn't just about stolen money anymore. This was stealing lives. Mark was already typing. "Name of the HOA? It's managed by a company called Neighborhood Solutions LLC. They oversee over 50 HOAs statewide. This isn't just a corrupt board, it's a corporate operation." Mark met my eyes. I nodded. "We're in." Within 2 hours, we had everything: property records, fake liens, doctored accounting. Mark uncovered a disturbing pattern: a system designed to create violations, foreclose, then flip homes through shell companies. Hundreds of victims. "This is industrial-scale fraud," he muttered. "They've done this to people across the state." My jaw clenched. "So what do we do?" He grinned. "Same thing we always do, make them regret it. Step 1, exposure." We sent the files to watchdog groups, journalists, legal advocates. By morning, the story had gone viral. Step 2, financial disruption. Mark used his federal contacts to trigger an IRS audit on Neighborhood Solutions LLC. When their accounts froze, everything unraveled. Lawsuits poured in. Within a week, they declared bankruptcy. Step 3, taking down the people in charge. Their CEO, Robert Langford, had built an empire by crushing lives. He brushed off the scandal, called it media hysteria. So Mark went deeper, and struck gold. Using public records and whistleblower testimony, he connected Langford's company to federal contract fraud. He'd used government funds to expand his scam. We hand-delivered the evidence to federal prosecutors. 2 days later, Robert Langford was led out of his office in handcuffs. Watching the footage, I realized we'd just taken down one of the biggest HOA crime syndicates in the country. We weren't just homeowners fighting back anymore. We were the reckoning they never saw coming. Mark leaned back, watching the news. "I think," he said with a smirk, "we just found our new full-time job." The takedown sent shockwaves through the industry. HOAs across the country came under investigation. State attorneys were flooded with complaints. Lawmakers introduced new regulations to limit HOA power. It was a war now, and the enemy had no idea how outgunned they were. But we weren't done. Mark sat at his laptop, scrolling through a growing list of names: corrupt property managers, fake elections, discriminatory fines. "They all do the same thing," he said. "Keep homeowners scared, fine them into silence, steal their property. And if they fight back?" He looked up at me, his expression cold. "We burn their entire house of cards down." I leaned against the doorframe, watching the names scroll past. "So what's next?" Mark grinned. "Simple. We make an example out of the worst one." That's when we found Clearwater Property Management, a multi-state firm scamming entire communities. Their playbook? Massive, emergency assessments. If you couldn't pay, they'd slap a lien on your house, foreclose, and sell it for profit. The kicker? Their CEO, Richard Vaugh, had been bribing local officials to look the other way. "This is the one," Mark said. "We don't just take them down. We destroy them." We began quietly. Contacted homeowners, gathered evidence, invoices, emails, even leaked memos outlining a strategy to push out undesirable residents, low-income families, the elderly, the disabled. But they made a mistake. They left a paper trail. Mark compiled everything into a federal complaint. "We're not just charging them with fraud," he said. "We're adding civil rights violations, racketeering, conspiracy, wire fraud." We sent the report to federal prosecutors, the state attorney general, and a network of journalists. The response was instant. Protests erupted. Lawsuits stacked up. But the real hammer came when the Department of Justice raided Clearwater's corporate offices. Richard Vaugh was gone. Fled on a private jet. Mark tracked the flight logs, destination, the Cayman Islands. He sent the intel to federal agents. 48 hours later, Vaugh was in handcuffs at the airport. Game over. The Clearwater empire collapsed overnight. Every fraudulent foreclosure was overturned. Homes were returned. And most importantly, legislation was passed. Laws that stripped HOAs of the power to fine, foreclose, and intimidate unchecked. As the storm faded, Mark and I sat in his backyard, watching the sun set over a quiet street. No HOA spies. No harassment. Just peace. "You think it's over?" I asked. Mark chuckled, sipping his coffee. "Not even close.